Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber. You are listening to AMAC's podcast, Better for America. And I'm here today with Bobby Charles, AMAC's highly decorated national spokesman. Bobby, I'm thrilled to have you back with me for the Reb and Rob show.
Reb, I love being on these shows, and God knows the world seems to deliver us something to talk about every time. So,
It sure does, Bobby. And I'm always so excited, really, to have this exchange with you. The world is really conspiring with us to put big pictures on the table just before this great show. And so, Bobby, I've said it so many times before, but your background really does lend itself well to a thorough and thoughtful discussion of the world, of the nation, and how all of these issues really tie together and affect us all. Just a reminder to our great listeners out there, Bobby served in the Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush White Houses. He ran oversight of the Defense, State, and Justice Departments for Congress, served as Assistant Secretary of State under Colin Powell, and served as a Navy intelligence officer for 10 years. Bobby, you've taught, you've written, you've litigated, and perhaps of the greatest importance today, you really keep your finger on the pulse of how big events, including international events, affect us here at home. It's really that seam between national security and personal security, and that's really part of what I want to talk about today. So I want to kind of just jump right in and talk about what's happening at home and how uncertainties afoot may affect the presidential campaign. This is something I'm hearing a lot from AMAC members. What's going to happen in November? So welcome again, and let me just dive right in. National security. There are so many events that are unfolding. We see Israel at war with Hamas, trade being interrupted in the Red Sea. Iran is killing American troops in Jordan. Hamas and Hezbollah sending missiles at Israel, not to mention Russia and China and how aggressive they are. So I've got two questions to start, Bobby. How can a sitting president show such weakness? And then, how might these events unfold should a Trump replace Biden in November? In other words, what kind of situation will the next president, assuming that's Trump, find himself in?
such good questions, Rebecca. And, I always try to find the silver linings in the world. Really, the silver lining is that if we get a Trump presidency, a really responsible leader who understands the gravity of these issues and also understands the dynamics between people and between countries. And people have called him Trump transactional. And I think that's just a buzzword. At the end of the day, it's whether or not the other country understands your intention and the truth behind what you say. And so the good news is that I think a new president would make a difference. I think it would put these people back in their box, a lot of them. But let's just unwrap a little bit of what you just described. It is an unprecedented global environment. Perhaps only a wartime environment, a real, global wartime environment, comes as close as this is to a sense of mass uncertainty or mass challenging of the United States because of our weakness. So to your initial question, a weak president is incredibly significant. And how do we see that? We see that China is, of course, leaning in, trying to take advantage in the South China Sea, and everywhere we see Russia, of course, having been effectively invited into Ukraine by Biden's weakness. We see a kind of a fallback position, which is the status quo there, which isn't particularly helpful. You see him having offered to Iran $6 billion in giveaways, really they're, unlocking assets in order to kind of buy them off in an appeasement way, which does not work. So let's hit the main points you just mentioned. You have the war between Israel and Hamas. Right now, that is like a ship without a rudder. Israel is doing what they think they have to do, but there is no coalescing force in the Middle East trying to bring a global peace out of this or any kind of a positive outcome. Instead, you have Hamas continuing to fight. You have Iran continuing, really encircling Israel, continuing to fire missiles at Israel from Hezbollah, guiding the Houthi rebels in the Red Sea. As you rightly note, that has shut down 10% of the world's trade goes through the Red Sea. And so the costs on things that we get here now reflect the delay, as well as having to go around Cape Hope in order to get here from the Far East or even from the Middle East. So all of these areas represent weakness generating aggression. And I think what we have to remember, you're absolutely right. A new president can put the genie in a sense back in the bottle. But we have an environment right now, the next 10, 11, 12 months, that is highly uncertain. And you have to link it. So it's going to affect us here. It'll affect prices more here. It'll affect the price of oil here, which means gas at the pump, which means groceries. It will affect the way in which the world sees us at large. And frankly, they look at Blinken and they look at Austin and they look at Biden and they look at Harris and they say these are just a bunch of empty suits. These people have no gravitas. They have no understanding of history. And so, the nutshell answer is weakness generates aggression. We're seeing a lot of that around the world, but a new president, quite frankly, could turn that dial immediately and it would change because expectations can change overnight if they believe that you're real. Last point, Ronald Reagan faced tough situation like this in the 80s and he sank half of Iran's navy. And if this administration was worth their salt, they wouldn't have waited any time at all. They would have immediately put together an international coalition and they would have sunk the destroyer, the Iranian destroyer that is in the Red Sea coordinating all the Houthi attacks against American interests. They didn't do that.
Yeah, a lot of AMAC members, and I count myself among one of them, do feel a great sense of unease about this presidential election and about the state of our world and security, really at our doorsteps. We see all of this international chaos, the unsecure border, illegal aliens are pouring into our towns and cities when we know we've got a president who can change that, who can make change today, doesn't need Congress to do anything in order to clean things up. We see crime and drug deaths that are up, not to mention the high price of groceries, heating, oil, gas. And then to make us more uneasy, we see a president who talks about conversing with a French president who has been dead for 25 years. I mean, I just watched the video. Go ahead and YouTube that video where Biden's talking about a conversation he had with somebody who is not alive. He can't articulate what he thinks, remember where he is. He's got a Justice Department who's wildly interfering with the election cycle by attacking his leading opponent with, I think it's very abusive, politically motivated lawsuits. Now, Bobby, you've worked in 2 White Houses and you lived through 13 or 14 elections. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
I haven't. And let me say, although history is always new, or rather, what comes tomorrow is always something that's new. We are living through a time that is fundamentally different from the way that normal elections have historically existed, and the way a president has protected the United States of America. And so we have a president who, at best, is out to lunch, and at worst, seems to be consciously working against the best interests of the average American. Just to validate people, I feel a sense of unease. I mean, I worked with Colin Powell on a daily basis. I worked in the Reagan White House. I certainly know what it means to be in a stable operating environment and to feel that despite the world's uncertainties, we have a beeline on the horizon. We can see where we are, and we know this feels like you're down in a deep trough on the big ocean, and you can't see the horizon. But let me offer again sort of maybe what I'll call a dead reckoning perspective, and that is that Americans at large are very self-correcting. We know when we don't feel at ease with our leadership, and they may not get it. They may live in their own little Washington bubble, but we get it. We understand where this is coming from, and I think we have a great capacity to correct the errors of our leaders. That's why democracy, or this republic, is such a vital beacon to the world. We do self-correct. We know that we self-correct because we've had some real lemons for leaders in the past. And after Jimmy Carter, God bless him, came Ronald Reagan. And after we had some bad times in the late 1800s, we get Theodore Roosevelt. We've had some rough water here. And I think what we just need to do is remember that everything you just described, the reality of swarms over the border, the reality of 100,000 young children dying of fentanyl that comes out of China and Mexico, Mexico, the idea, and teenagers, the idea that we are in a drift where crime is up, where we've cut policing, all these things, these Democrats, mayors letting felons out on the street, the idea that we've got carjackings and all kinds of things at record levels, and of course, the economy, which we all live with every day. These are true errors in judgment. And I think the hope, honestly, is that we're not stupid. We don't all have PhDs, and I don't have one. But the reality is we can look at the world and we can see with our own two eyes what we see. And what we see is a huge need for change. And I think we all know that. And God bless America in the most fundamental way, because as long as we can keep our Constitution real, which is what AMAC fights for all Americans, for all time, every day, as long as we can keep that real, we actually can reverse these really horrible downturns.
One of the things that has me concerned, and I know a lot of our listeners, is the fact that we've got, and people are saying over 10 million illegals that have crossed our border since Biden has been in office. Now, that can fundamentally change not only, how towns and cities look, but also who's voting in the presidential election. And, people ought to know that if you're coming over illegal, you're given a federal ballot. This is happening. We know that this is happening. AMAC is going to be doing some work on this front. We'll have a great article in the next issue of the AMAC magazine. We see that this is happening, and my concern is that this is all orchestrated, and people are wise. They're wising up. They're saying this is something that is being planned so that, the lines, the mapping can change. Certain cities and states will have greater representation, but this will be, they'll be representing people who don't speak the American language, who actually hate our freedoms, perhaps, and who plan, many of them, to vote for a Joe Biden. That is a great top concern for many of our AMAC members. And I'm getting a lot of email and mail from members saying, what are we doing on this front? As you see what's happening, what are your top concerns? And how do we address them? How do we get back to normal?
Yeah. So I would say, honestly, the border may be the number one concern of all Americans. And if it isn't already, it will be. The economy is probably number two. I would say, to put a catch line on it, culture rot is a really significant issue in this country. The idea that we're disowning, disavowing, and disrespecting the culture that was handed to us at great sacrifice by those men and women who are in places like Arlington and who have gone before us. And then finally, I think that there's sort of again, I would call it a broad unease. But let's go to the border for a minute. Your numbers are correct, and at the end of the day, and I read these things every day, and I stay very close to law enforcement. The border bill that was just put up was complete rubbish. Really, what it was is it said we'll allow 5,000 illegal aliens in every day and just let them come. It said we'll change the requirements for asylum, which already are what they should be. They're just not being enforced. The well-founded fear of persecution that allows you to make an asylum application is individuated to you. So if you, as a particular person in that country of origin, have been targeted, if you personally, not because you'd like to come to the streets of gold of America, not because you'd like a better life, that does not qualify you for asylum. Asylum has to do with an individuated persecution of you for reasons of politics, religion, sexual orientation, anything else. Those things are very specific to the applicant. And at the end of the day, what we've done is we've completely abandoned that. Incidentally, that traditionally is not granted unless you're applying from the country. So when you go to a third country like Mexico, from a country like Venezuela or anywhere else in the world, or Guatemala, you're suddenly not in a country that's persecuting you. So as an asylum applicant, you should be immediately denied because you can stay in the country to it. Mexico has their own asylum rules, right? So this is not the way this works. You don't just get to hop, skip, and jump over to the place that you really want to be. The other part is this bill was such a joke because it said, well, we won't release illegal aliens into the country for years, setting their date for an adjudication of asylum years ahead. We'll just set it months ahead. Once you release the open gates, and the cattle are out, they're out. Okay. And at that point, and, not just a metaphor, but the bottom line is once you allow illegal aliens into this country, the vast majority never return to that asylum hearing. So where's the hope? I will say that the hope on both that and other issues is the awareness of the American people, Rebecca. We're seeing this in Maine, in Oregon, in Washington, in Texas, yes, of course, on the border, but well beyond the border. Look at New York City, overrun, and even the Democrat mayor hasn't got a clue what to do. He's decided he's just going to give away credit cards to these illegal aliens because he's got no clue what to do. And so the bottom line is we have a lot of interests working against the fundamental conscience and understanding of rightness and wrongness by this administration. They just released new regulations on business saying that any emission basically is going to be considered pollution, which is going to put half of these businesses out of business. They're invading the schools, and they're causing parents to have to defend their children against being taken for transgender surgeries to other states, literally kidnapped. Maine just defeated a law that would have allowed non-parents to bring minors into the state to have their bodies mutilated on behalf of a change of their gender. That is absolute absurdity. Nothing like that should even be admitted as a bill under discussion, nor should we be talking about the fact that in the United States we're going to disown large parts of our history. No. So what I guess I'm really getting at, Rebecca, is we all feel this pain. And I've been at the highest levels of this government. I know that these people have the capacity to understand these things. They're just doing this intentionally the wrong way. And I will say I ran an investigation in 1996 called it was into what then was the INS, Immigration Naturalization Service. And just so in case any viewers or listeners think it's not possible that you could actually be causing these illegal aliens to vote, the Clinton Gore people actually had a system in place by which they brought illegal aliens. They immediately had illegal aliens that were here turned into naturalized citizens. And when they couldn't do that, they affiliated them with voter groups so that the voter groups could then coordinate with them to get an illegal vote to be cast. It was a much smaller, it was in the hundreds of thousands rather than the millions. But all of this has been done before. It's just being done at an industrial strength level. And when you allow illegal aliens to come over this border at industrial strength by the millions, and you imagine that that's somehow normal, you've fundamentally misunderstood what it means to be a citizen, to protect the citizenship and the border of the country. It's not a dotted line on the piece of paper that is a real line unless you enforce it. And, here again, let us hope that the next president understands the gravity as a national security threat that the border represents.
Yeah, we here at AMAC, of course, are all for legal immigration. Matter of fact, we want more people in this country. We understand that this is the place where people can pursue dreams, where freedom reigns. I pray continues in the future, although we do feel that each and every one of us is feeling the heaviness of government really intruding in our life. And you mentioned earlier, Bobby, culture rot, or people not loving America like maybe they did decades ago. When I was driving home from work, I saw a pickup truck. On the back of the truck, it had this great American flag. He had USA all over the back of his truck. I stand for the flag. And I'll tell you, just seeing that truck, and we see them all over, really gave me a sense of hope, whereas maybe 5 years ago I wouldn't have noticed it, but I thought there are so many good people who do understand. 1776 was the year that our nation was founded. We understand that our founding fathers had an idea of what America should be, and although we're not perfect, we believe in those ideas, the ideas that our rights come from our Creator God, that government and man should not be determining whether or not people have a right to live. That should be a God-given right. So these issues like abortion and issues like keeping Americans safe, protecting people and business so that they can flourish, all so very important to what we do here every day at AMAC. It's just so important, though, that people understand the difference between what's happening at the border and, we're bringing in too many people that are dangerous to society, and that's why they're coming here, really to threaten our great liberties. Bobby, I want to talk to you a little bit about, the legal stuff because you're a seasoned litigator and you've held legal positions in and out of government. You've had a really good perspective. You were a U.S. Court of Appeals clerk. You had a legal role in the first Bush White House and were a legal counsel as well as investigator. So as we think about all of these stakes, right, in the coming election, tell us a little bit of what is happening to rule of law in this country. And we know it's tied to just not having control over, who's living in our country, because that affects everything. I mean, it's going to affect our elections, public trust in our elections, the safety of our streets. Tell us a little bit about
Yeah,
law
so it's a
itself and
very
what it means.
yeah, it's a poignant observation, and your last comment is very germane to it, Rebecca. We obviously love legal immigration. Rule of law involves adjudicating whether someone should or shouldn't be admitted. We admit lots of people every year legally, but it's sort of emblematic of this breakdown of rule of law when you say that even at the border, at the perimeter, on one of these seams where we must distinguish between the legal and the illegal, we've given that fight up. But widen that aperture a little bit, and you think about all the ways in which this administration has disrespected and ultimately thrown under the bus the rule of law. And it goes back even before this administration, actually. If you think about what happened to Donald Trump right off the bat, where they tried to delegitimize his presidency with this Russia collusion probe, all of that by Obama and by others and by Hillary Clinton was a knowing disregard for the law, knowing disregard when they went to the FISA court, knowing disregard when they promulgated a narrative that tried to undermine the democratic capacities of a president. All of those things were the beginning. Now we turn the dial and we're here in the Biden administration, and we see, what do we see? We see rule of law undermined when the Supreme Court comes out with a decision like Dobbs. They go around, which of course said that the abortion question must be decided at the state level. There is never was a constitutional right to an abortion found in our Constitution. It doesn't exist. When that happens, they don't protect Supreme Court justices in the run-up to that decision. This administration, Merrick Garland and his Justice Department, they actually almost have a justice get killed because they're not paying attention. They ultimately then go around and start arresting the peaceful anti-abortion protesters, even as they allow violence to be done to those who are, trying to guide people on how the Dobbs decision can help save children. And by the way, it has saved millions of children already. You go from the Dobbs decision to the Second Amendment. The governors around this country who are Democrats have, in New York, in Maryland, in New Mexico, have ignored the Second Amendment rulings of the Supreme Court. This administration has done nothing except undermine the Second Amendment decisions. The Supreme Court rules that the President of the United States then does not have a legal right constitutionally under any of our 200 years of law to take to himself, to usurp to himself the power to forgive $500 billion in student loans. And this president ignores that Supreme Court decision and goes ahead and forgives loans anyway, and then starts boasting about the fact that he has punched the Supreme Court in the nose and he's going to do what he wants. The same kind of a boast, incidentally, that we heard from Mr. Obama, who said, I don't need anybody to tell me I can do anything I want with my pen and my telephone. Okay? All of that is anti-democratic, Rebecca. All of that undermines rule of law. And then you go to the more fundamental things. They have undermined rule of law by undermining law enforcement all over the country. They have undermined rule of law by defunding the police, by letting felons, as I said earlier, out of the jails and having no compunction about it, by legalizing drugs that are killing kids right and left. They have ultimately not enforced laws that would protect us, and they have allowed laws to be promulgated that actually make us less safe. And then you come to the scandals. Look at this president. There's no respect for rule of law when you take tens of millions, they say it may now be $100 million combined out of Ukraine and China and Romania, and you plunk it into your family accounts. You let your son be the cutout for all this. You then protect your son. Your attorney general tries to strike private deals that protect your son from future prosecution. You knowingly knowingly are involved in the ultimate violation of the law. This is worse than anything Richard Nixon ever did, anything that Warren G. Harding ever did. I mean, this is genuine, outright graft. This is knowing violation of the laws. And then make it even worse. You take an opponent who is leading all over the United States, your political opponent who is leading all over the United States in his wish to return to policies that the American people want, even if whether you like his personality or not is really irrelevant. People want him because he does believe in rule of law, and he does believe in an economy and a national security and a border and law enforcement. He believes in these things. That's why Americans are gravitating to him. And what happens? You allow your Justice Department, you actually enshrine a guy that legally shouldn't even be there. Ed Meese has filed a brief saying Jack Smith should not even have been appointed because he's not legally entitled to be appointed. But you appoint a federal prosecutor who, incidentally, 9-0 was sanctioned by the Supreme Court in 2014 for being a political actor and going after a Republican governor illegally. And you allow that guy to now bring two huge cases against your opponent so that you can nobble him, take away his time, take away his legal rights, take away his First Amendment rights, his Fourth Amendment rights, his Fifth Amendment rights, his 14th Amendment rights, and you take all these away from him. And then you also allow a governor, two state level prosecutors, one set in New York and one in Georgia, who have their own ethical issues. You allow them to take potshots at your opponent, and you do nothing. So what does it all come down to? It comes down to the thing you, Rebecca, pointed out a moment ago. This election may be about China and Iran and Russia and national security and the border and crime and the economy. But more than anything else, this election is about whether we do or don't believe in rule of law. If we believe in rule of law, then we don't believe in the things then we shouldn't be voting for the things that this administration is doing. If we do believe in rule of law, we should be voting for people who also believe in rule of law. And yeah, it really comes down to the fact that this election in many ways is about, if you believe in rule of law, then you're probably not going to vote for Biden.
Yeah, very well said. And I'm talking to a lot of younger people across the country and here at home on Long Island, and it'll be interesting to see if Trump can win over that base. There does seem to be a number of people who are getting caught up or confused in all of the chaos and the noise, and really legacy media and social media that is sort of spinning, I think. Spinning a story here. So it'll be interesting to see how things unfold, how these indictments really impact Trump in the long term, or in the short long term, I should say, leading up to November, and what happens between now and then. So lots of things unfolding. Bobby, I'm looking forward to having you back with me in just a couple weeks as we keep our eye on all things. But before I let you run, I love what we do. We love to wrap up with a story of some sort, or maybe, where you share your perspective on something that gives us hope, that gives you hope, either in the news or from your personal experience.
Yeah. What a great opening. I can say anything. Yeah, so I'll say this. First of all, thank you for mentioning rule of law, because in the end, honestly, it by itself gives us hope. We have always been, again, a self-correcting country. But there's a recent event that I think should give us some hope, and really give us unusual hope. Starting about 10 or so years ago, a lot of the high schools started to drop on behalf of what they said was accommodation of minorities, et cetera, which is racist in its own right, by the way. But they would drop their requirements for math, and they would drop their requirements for reading, and they would drop them for biology. And of course, what they've also done is twisted the definition of all those words, like biology. But that was at the high school level, and then at the college level, lowering or stepping away from objectivity. The three R's, so reading, writing, and arithmetic, as they used to say, are really fundamental to whether our work community, our work base in this country, our labor base, has the fundamentals to be good at what they do. Whether you're a plumber or a lawyer or a doctor or a carpenter, it really doesn't matter. You need to learn those fundamentals. What would our houses look like if our carpenters didn't know a little bit of math? So at the end of the day, it's very important that we teach these fundamentals and do it in an objective way. Well, the colleges actually started to follow the high schools, or perhaps they led them in dropping objectivity. They decided that about 80% of the colleges by about a year ago had decided they don't need SATs anymore. They don't need objective scoring anymore. And of course, the COVID, pandemic. Thank you to China, also eroded a lot of our objectivity, and caused a lot of these colleges to say, well, we're gonna go whole hog now. We're just gonna drop the SAT and the ACT because those are objective things, and these poor kids didn't have any chance to learn, and so we're just not gonna do that anymore. We'll make it our feelings will decide who gets into the college, and our feelings will decide whether or not we think this person ought to be here. Well, interestingly, Dartmouth College just last week, a new female president did a deep dive, a study internally, and looked at all of the connections between the students that they had gotten SATs from and those they had not gotten SATs from. And they made a tremendous finding and immediately reinstated objectivity. They reinstated the idea of SATs and scores, how you do in math, how you do in reading, how you do in writing will now be counted in how they admit students. And why does that matter? Well, it's fascinating. The liberal left can barely hold themselves back now, and Dartmouth is holding their ground. A very obviously one of the Ivy League schools. What they said is, look, what your idea, the national idea of subjective admissions did is it actually hurt low-income kids because they decided that their SATs weren't going to be high enough to make the grade. So, and they were given the option of not including their scores. So when they came to apply, we didn't see their scores. And it turns out that a lot of their scores would have admitted them to the Ivy League because we always look at that score in the context of the school system they came from, the family they came from, the money background that they have or don't have, and it's needs based. It's not needs based. It's open admission. In other words, if you're maybe you're a farm girl, maybe you're an inner city kid that had to buck a lot of things in order to get that 700 or that whatever your score was, and they look at that. So fascinatingly, Dartmouth thinks they will actually get more kids that they're going to go back to the idea of using the SATs. They're going to go back to objectivity. They're going to go back to the idea that we want reading and writing and arithmetic to be central to who we admit to college, and ultimately we think that's going to make a better workforce out there in America at large. Now, that is the way that all the colleges used to operate. Whatever else you want to say about the SAT, that's what they did. They took it and they required it. The neat part is that this could be the beginning of a trend where colleges and perhaps even high schools go back to the idea that real learning, really objective skills, the things you can measure on an SAT, are relevant and are going to be used. And I'll tell you from a personal perspective, Rebecca, I am so proud of Dartmouth because my father never finished college. And I grew up in rural Maine, and I went to an unaccredited high school. And my mother was a school teacher that raised four kids on about $12,000 a year. Took the SAT, did the stuff everybody's supposed to do to get into college, had no connections whatsoever to Dartmouth, didn't even have a father who'd finished college, and they admitted me. And so I've tried to do what I can with that education, and that's what every American now has a shot at. And if all the other colleges and high schools will kind of take a little page from that book, more Americans who wouldn't otherwise have a shot will have a shot at the American dream.
Bobby, thank you so much for sharing that story. It really is an all-American story. It really just warms my heart and touches my heart that you had such great parents, that you were encouraged, and that you achieved so much throughout the years. And this is what we want to see more of in America for all people. So thank you so much for sharing that. Now, Bobby, you and I will be together soon. I want to remind everybody watching and listening to tune in because we will be, AMAC, that is, at CPAC. That'll happen down in Washington, D.C. Excited about that, Bobby. You'll be there as well.
I sure will, and I'm excited too. Look, this is going to probably be one of the most exciting CPACs and AMAC, engagements there that we've ever had, because it's existential what's going to happen this year for the United States of America, and conservatives need to speak up. So I'm with you 100%.
Absolutely. So, Robert, Bobby Charles will be on Radio Row. He'll be interviewed throughout the day. I'll be there with AMAC's Better for America and AMAC's very own Andy Mangione. Until next time, folks, don't forget to like and share this podcast. Tell your friends and neighbors all about AMAC. Make sure to join or renew with AMAC. There's so much that we're doing for you. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Hello, AMAC members. Get ready for your next adventure with exclusive access to TripWise, the travel protection plan brought to you by our partner, Trip Insurance Consultants. Protect your travel investment with features like cancel for any reason, medical evacuation, and more, all at an exclusive, affordable rate. Trip Insurance Consultants offers personal customer service to guide you through selecting the right coverage. Join countless AMAC members who trust TripWise for peace of mind. Visit tripinsuranceconsultants.com/AMAC to unlock exclusive access. Travel confidently with Trip Insurance Consultants, your AMAC partner in travel protection.